Welcome to Your Success TV. I'm Ken Wells, your host, and today we're going to be talking about first responders and legal matters. And joining me today is John Schuman from Devry Smith Frank LLP. So John, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
So a first responder is somebody who is first that would arrive at the scene of an accident or a natural disaster or a terrorist attack. And a first responder is somebody who is can give pre-hospital care to somebody before they actually get to the hospital. So today we're going to talk about some of the legal matters surrounding that. So to start off, John, why is your law firm better suited to look after the legal aspects of first responders than other law firms?
Well, I am an Ontario paramedic, and I have been an Ontario paramedic now for almost 25 years. I was doing that long before I was a lawyer. In fact, I did it throughout my legal training, in fact, and I've been doing it a bit since. And over that time, like the last 15 years or so, because I continue to be involved in that community, in the emergency services community, I've had a lot of police officers, firefighters, paramedics, especially paramedics, come to me and ask me about their legal problems. And so I've got to know what those are, in addition to knowing what sort of it's like to be a first responder and the unique issues that face first responders that don't face other members of the public.
So what is it about first responders that makes them so unique than, let's say, other regular everyday people?
Well, most first responders come to the job because they want to be the person who goes in to help. They're the people who answer the 911 calls, and so they're drawn to being the person who goes in to save others. And that is, it makes them a particularly, outgoing or caring group of people. And it's also a group of people who sort of run in when everyone else is running out. So they have a bit of a bit more familiar with danger and seeing the bad side of things. And there's also, it can be a stressful type of situation to work in. It's also a situation where even though you can be in control of an emergency because you're the person in charge of the emergency, in your job in general, you're not the person in control because it's a highly regulatory, very public type of job. So there's a lot of eyes watching on you to make sure you're doing the right thing. Even in situations of chaos, you're being watched to make sure you're doing the right thing. So that has an impact on the, you as well. There's also the fact of what you're going to all the time. And this is a thing that, is coming to light a bit more now, but a lot of people don't realize is that there is a big effect that seeing people at their worst can have on first responders. And one of the things that, is the worst thing to ask, especially paramedics, but other first responders as well, is what's the worst thing you've seen? Because the worst thing a paramedic or a firefighter or a police officer is seeing is something unimaginable to most people, something that's so terrible. And when you ask a person what's the worst thing you've seen, that means you're asking them to sort of think back, remember, relive that horrible experience. So that's something to stay away from, but that's something that when you're dealing with first responders, you have to be sensitive to. That they come from that sort of background and they've seen things and they understand things. And that's sort of where that draws the community together a bit too, that they have seen things and they understand each other. And because, I'm from that community, there's other people here who have sort of experience in that sort of role as well. They understand a bit more about what it's like to be in the role of a first responder and the special perspective and the outlook that first responders have.
So obviously, going through all those seeing all those things that they're seeing and whatnot, I mean, it must present some really unique challenges from a legal point of view, right? So what kind of legal challenges would they have, versus somebody else who just has a regular job?
So that happens in a number of ways. So one of the ones that we see a bit of is because it's a regulatory type area, and it's a strange sort of regulatory area in that in a lot of situations for a lot of first responders, their employer is not necessarily the person who has all the control over their job because they also have a regulatory body or they have a public accountability office or someone who actually watches what they're doing. So their employer is one person they have to account to, but there's this other body that can sort of take away their job or take them off the job if they feel that something inappropriate has happened. So you're sort of drawn between two people, and that can lead to some conflict. It can lead to some employment issues. It can lead to some not employment issues, but some regulatory compliance issues and some administrative law issues. So that's one area. Another area is that it's also related to work is the recognition of workplace injuries, and that not all workplace injuries are visible, not all of them are physical. So there is a big mental health component to being a first responder, and I think there's increasing awareness. I mean, I think people who have been doing it as long as I have recognized that sometimes that the mental health part has always been there, but it was sort of presented as other ways, but there always has been that, and there's an understanding of that, and there has to be some, it can be difficult to get the help you need in that, and you need an advocate in the system, in the WSIB system, in the personal injury system with your employer to understand that you need some help through this sort of situation, and that's where it helps to have someone who cares. And there's also areas where just the lifestyle effects, and one of the areas that is familiar is family law, because first responders work shift work, which means they work 24/7, they work nights, they work days. That can make scheduling things more difficult. It can make their income more complicated. It can make the whole impact of the job can have days when someone's unhappy or sad or whatever, and that can impact on how they present during their case or before their case, or why there's a separation, or how their parenting happens. So those are all things and that can affect in other ways. I mean, there are also all the usual legal things like buying a house, which doesn't have as much of an impact on first responder, but it's always nice to have someone who understands where you're coming from when you're talking about doing your legal issues and having anything else that's associated with it.
So could you kind of walk us through maybe a specific example of how a first responder, how their challenges would be that much more difficult, shall we say, than the regular Joe who has a typical job?
Okay. So one area where there's a bit of, as I mentioned, is the regulatory issue. And when you have, and I think police and paramedics are particularly familiar with this, but there's also nurses who have a college they have to report to, and doctors who have their college they report to. So you work for one person, and that person has control over your work environment and their usual employment standards. But then there's someone else who's looking after how well you do your job. And they can say whether or not you continue in your job, or whether you can continue doing your job, regardless of what your employer thinks. So your employer may think you are a fine employee, but the regulatory body may say, no, we want you to stop because we have concerns about something. And there was a recent case in Alberta where the College of Paramedics took a paramedic off the road because they were concerned about their mental health that the employer did not share. And that can happen as well, in other areas where the college can be different from the employer, and you've got these two different type of bosses you're trying to work with, and it can be difficult, or it can be challenging to have one to the other. And then you've got to have an employer who has to accommodate, perhaps because of what the college is doing, or the college has to recognize that the employer hasn't done things properly, or hasn't given you what you need, and that can be a real crossover of concerns. And sometimes you can get lost in the middle if you're the employee who's got these two things working against you. You need someone to help help guidance through those. I mentioned already that one personal injuries, especially job-related injuries, you're entitled to be accommodated, and sometimes you need someone to advocate for you to realize that what you're saying you're hurting, you're saying something's wrong, and people are saying, well, you don't look hurt. Well, sometimes you need someone to say, no, this is a recognized problem. You need to provide accommodation. You need to do what's necessary to get this person back on the job and get them back in earning their full income capacity. And with family law, the one we see a fair amount is scheduling of child custody access things.
Yeah.
Because people who work 9 to 5, that's an easy schedule. You can have alternate weekends, you can have it during the week. But if you've got one parent who's a first responder and one parent who's not, then you've got a crazy schedule, because you've got to have some weekends they're with, sometimes weekends they can't work, some nights they're available, some nights they're not working. It's a rotating schedule, so it can be complicated. If you've got two parents who are working as first responders, and they've got a rotating schedule, and they've got different rotating schedules, and it becomes really complex. And you have to understand that explaining that to a judge is almost impossible in like a short motion. You really need to get involved and have someone involved helping with your parenting schedule who can get into the complexities of that type of problem. And then there's also the issue is that most first responders do a lot of overtime, or they have a second job because of the shift rotation, and that can relate to income issues. And always there's pensions, which is a big issue in family law, because all first responders are in pension environment in Ontario. So that's something else that has to be taken into account.
Right, and I guess there's also something to be said about most first responders, don't work to, the age of 65, right? A lot of them are shorter, so therefore pensions have a lot bigger impact on them.
That's right, and there's also has to be a recognition that when we have this issue in family law about someone being deliberately unemployed and not earning to their full potential. And there can be a time when, as a first responder, you have to say, I have to stop. I can't do this anymore. It's either for a period or it can be permanently, depending on the situation. And you have to be able to have someone who can explain to others that say, no, this is the end of a career because of accumulation of factors that are outside of the first responder's control. It's not a deliberate ceasing of employment to avoid support. It's a need to move on to something else.
So actually, I was surprised in a way that I heard that you were a paramedic for like over 20 years, and I know a lot of other people that are lawyers at Devry Smith Frank as well have at one point been first responders. So what really is that really what sets DSF up as a kind of a unique law firm to help first responders?
I think so. In addition to me, we have other lawyers who have been first responders at some point in their career and who have, or either that or closely related to or have close interactions with first responders. And we've done a lot of work for first responders in the past. So we have a lot of people who understand what it is to be a first responder, and we understand the legal issues probably as good or better than anyone else. I mean, it's a unique position for me to be both a paramedic and a lawyer, and some people think it's odd, but it also allows me to help people in a very specific way, especially first responders. It's a unique set of qualifications. And because of that, we get all the problems, we understand the problems, we understand the support that first responders need. Where they need additional help, that's non-legal help as part of their case, we can get them to that help. We can get them start to end of their legal problem in a caring way that reflects who they are and where they're coming from. In addition to all that, because of where we're coming from, and we have first responders who are on staff, or former first responders who are on staff here, and we understand the importance of the job and what they do for people, we also offer 20% discount to first responders in many of our practice areas.
Okay, that's great. So John, that's all we have time for today. So thank you very much again for sharing your knowledge, and I'm sure a lot of first responders out there would really appreciate that. If you are a first responder and you do run into some challenges and you need some legal help, I encourage you to get in contact with John, and again, we'll have his contact information below this video. That's it for this week. To your success.